Maseches Yevamos Daf Tzadi Ches continues the Gemara's discussion about the relationships of an Akum who converted a Ger. Is he related to his previous relatives, his relatives from his previous life? Will differentiate between relatives from his father's side, relatives from his mother's side. The questions that it's negeya to is he usher to the Arayas that would have been his relatives in his previous life, and is he negate to the mitzvah of Yibum? Does he have a brother from his previous existence? This will take up 3/4 of the daf. We'll also sidestep into a question about Yonah Hanavi and how many nevuas did he get. Then the last quarter of the daf will bring the next Mishnah, which will talk about what is the halacha when you have 5 boys that are intermingled at birth, and now you don't know who their brothers are, and if they all have a situation where their wives fall to Yibum, what do? You don't know who the brothers are. It could be any of the 5. So let's begin. We've been discussing the relationships of an Akum who converts, and there are 3 potential reasons to say that he doesn't have relatives. First of all, he doesn't really know who his father is. Akamar Shtufi Zima, and therefore, just because he was born from a woman does not mean that her husband is his father. So we don't practically know who his father is. Second of all, it could be that there is no fatherhood amongst Akum. They're just not considered to be fathers al pi halacha. And the third is when he converts, he's kekatan sheno adami. So the first 2 questions only apply to relatives of the father, not relatives of the mother. The last one would apply to relatives of the mother as well. So the place where that's nogay the most is in a question that the Gemara has been discussing. So Machokas Amaraim, 2 brothers who convert, they shared a mother. Are they considered to be brothers? Are they considered to be related or not? Do we say that they're kekatan shenolat and therefore they're not related and they're allowed to marry each other's wives and there's no mitzvah of yibum? Or do we say that they are considered to be brothers, they're not kekatan shenolad, they're also to marry each other's wives, and there is a mitzvah? Well, there wouldn't be a mitzvah of yibum anyway because they're only brothers from the mother's side. So the Gemara is going to try to bring a couple of proofs to this particular subject. Before the Gemara starts in on that, the Gemara says, let's just clarify, when we say that there's no relatives of the father is not considered to be the father in an Akum, it's not only because they are Shtufei Zima and we don't really know who the father is. It's also because there is no halachic status of fatherhood amongst the Akum. And you see that, says the Gemara, because we just learned the Mishnah, which said he had 2 twins. And the twins are not considered to be sharing a father. So twins, you don't have a concern that they don't have the same father. Halachically, they definitely have the same father because they're born from the same drop of zera, they're born from the same bia, so it's got to be the same father. Even if they're Shtufizim, it's the same father. So that's not the issue. The issue is just that there is no yichus, there's no fatherhood amongst the Akum, and that's learned from a pasuk that says, B'sar chamarim b'sarim, v'zer masusim zer masam, their flow is that of a horse, their flesh is that of a donkey. There is no yichus, just like you don't have yichus by animals, you don't have yichus by Akum. Alright, now the Gemara goes into the question we've been discussing, which was, is there considered to be kekatan shenolad, and brothers that convert are allowed to marry each other's wives, or is there not? So the Gemara brings its first proof, and we'll have a number of proofs, but they'll all be a similar pattern, and they'll have the same answer. So the Gemara says the first proof is a brisa that says that Rabbi Yossi had an incident in a Niftaim where there was a convert who married his brother's wife, and that was a brother that they shared a mother. The story came before the Chachamim, and they said there's no such thing as a wife of a ger. There's no ishus to a ger. The Gemara says that can't be meant literally. Obviously, it doesn't mean to say that a ger who marries a woman is not married to her and anybody else is allowed to. It's not true. Once he converts, he's married to her. He's Yisrael like anything else. It means to say that there's no iser ishus ach between 2 brothers. So here you clearly see it's kekatan shenola. There's no iser ishus ach. So Gemara says no. This wasn't talking about where they married their wives. Each of these 2 brothers married their wives after they converted. It's talking about where they married their wives before they converted, and therefore their wives aren't their wives. A marriage, they married nachriyas, they married akums, and those wives aren't considered to be wives al pi halacha. That's why the brothers are each allowed to marry them, not because they're kekatan shenolad. Versus if that's true, so what's the chiddush? Of course, any wife he married while he was still an akum doesn't count as anything. That's not a marriage. Certainly if the woman was an akum as well. There's no issue there. Gemara says you may think that there's a gzeira. We should be asering derabanan, because you may get confused if you allow this person to marry his eishesach, even though it's not a real eishesach, it's only an eishesach in the status of akum. You may think the same thing applies to Yisrael, therefore we should make a gzeira. So the chiddush here is to tell you that there is no gzeira. Gemara says, okay, I have another similar proof. There was someone named Ben Yasain who says, when I went to the villages of the sea, I found a ger there, a convert who married his eishesach. He married his brother's wife, and again it was a brother from the mother. And I said, who allowed you to do that? So he said, there's a woman and her 7 children. She converted, they converted with her. They all sat here on the bench right here, and Rabbi Akiva sat here, and he poskin that they're all allowed to marry their brother's wives. Now he said 2 things actually. He said that, and he also said that Yonah Navi only got nevuah twice. It says, V'hi dvar Hashem el Yonah shenis, that the word of Hashem came to Yonah the second time. There was only a second time, there was no third time. So anyway, so you see from here that the first halacha of Rabbi Akiva is that a ger is allowed to marry his brother's wife. Somewhere says the same answer. This is talking about the brother's wife that the brother married before he converted, and therefore it's not a real wife. The chiddush, just like we said before, is that they shouldn't make a gzeira. Something where it asks, let's talk about this Yonah Hanavi thing here for a minute. First of all, this guy who said over this halacha, he was quoting Rabbi Akiva to matir a specific scenario. Do you believe someone if he's quoting a chacham, brings a halacha, we never heard it before, a specific scenario, who brings this halacha? There's always the suspicion there that he made that up. We should have heard of this halacha previously had it been true. So there's a couple of reasons here that we believe him. First of all, he brought another halacha with him. He brought the halacha of Yonah Hanavi. He brought another limbud. And since he said those 2 together, since that half is true, this half is true as well. Second of all, maybe I could tell you that he really said over this halacha before the case came up. And third is because he had an example. He had the Isha Veshiva Banel. He said a story that he came with the woman with the 7 sons. He had a whole background information that makes it more believable. He's not just saying over halacha, he's quoting a specific psak. So now the Gemara says, hold a second, let's talk about this Yonah Hanavi. You said he only got nevuah twice, but there's a pasuk in Sefer Malachim that says he got nevuah. It talks about the king Yevamos ben Yoash, not to be confused with Yevamos ben Nevat, Yevamos ben Yoash, who turned Klal Yisrael back in Tshuva. So it says, "V'hu heishav es gvul Yisrael milavoy Chamas ad yam harava k'dvar Hashem asher diber b'yad avdo Yonah ben Amitai Hanavi." So you see, there was another Dvar Hashem that he talked to Yonah Hanavi about the borders. Someone says, okay, so first answer is, when we said he didn't get another nevuah, we meant he didn't get another nevuah about Ninveh. He only got 2 nevuahs about Ninveh, nothing else. Second answer is that when he said, like the nevuah to Yonah Hanavi, he didn't mean that he said over the borders like the nevuah of Yonah. It means that he turned Klal Yisrael back to tshuva like Yonah Hanavi turned Ninveh back to tshuva with his nevuah. Now, Tosfos here points out that there are other nevuahs that Yonah got in Sefer Navi about Ninveh, so how can we say that he only got 2? Tosfos explains it was on the same day as the other one. It was the same, this nevuah and the previous one happened on the same day, and therefore it's considered one long nevuah. Okay, now we're going to bring another proof, and this is a lengthy Mishnah talking about relationships and whether they create isurim or not when a ger converts. But here it's a bit more complex, because here we're not talking about a ger who just converted. We're talking about someone who was conceived shaloi b'kedusha and he was born b'kedusha. That means to say his mother converted while she was pregnant with him. In a case like that, he doesn't have a relationship with his father, because his father's only contribution here is the conception, and at that time he was a guy, the mother was a guy, everyone was a guy, therefore there's no relationship there. However, he is related to his mother and his mother's family, because his mother gave birth to him b'kedusha, and there was no katan shenoilad. There was no conversion after that to cancel those relationships. He didn't do a conversion to cancel the relationship with his mother, because she was already converted by the time she gave birth to him. So the halacha here is therefore that he's considered to be related to his mother and his mother's relatives, not to his father and his father's relatives. Now the Mishnah talks about, is there an Isser Erva to him on the relatives of his relatives to his mother's side and his father's side. Now we're not talking about real Isurim, because we're talking about, for example, the first thing we'll discuss is the sister that was born before his mother converted. So he's definitely not related to her because she is not converted. She converted separately if she did, and she would be Kekatan Shano Adami. The issue is there Gzeira D'Rabbanan? Are we afraid if we allow him to marry his sister, it'll create confusion? And there's Machlokes Rishonim what the Gzeira is exactly. Perhaps he might marry a younger sister who he's usher to, or someone else may think a regular Yisrael is allowed to marry a sister. So either way, there's a potential for a Gzeira D'Rabbanan over here. So the Brisa says these Gzeras D'Rabbanan are only made when there's a relationship through the mother, because he's related to his mother, and people will think that these halachos are true in any relationship through the mother. They won't realize that that here it's not nogea because the sister or the other relatives, which we'll discuss, aren't related to him because they converted. If, however, his only relationship with these people is through a father, then we don't have an issue. So let's go through the cases. The Mishnah brings a number of cases. So it says, first of all, a sister through a father, you don't have to be concerned. Everybody knows he's not related to the sister because he's not even related to his own father, because he was conceived Shalei B'Kedusha. A sister through the mother, people think that that's a real sister, don't realize that she converted, and therefore you can't allow him to marry her. Now, his mother, the sisters of his father. Now again, there's no relationship to the sisters of his father. His father's an Akum, but depends if it's a sister of his father through the mother or a sister of his father through their father. So sister of the father through their father, again, the only relationships here, the only connections are through a siblinghood through a father, therefore it's not a problem, he can marry her. If it's a siblinghood through the mother, though, his father's sister through their mother, there we are afraid of confusion. You have siblinghood through a mother, we're afraid people are going to mix that up to his own sister through his mother, and we might come to be matir that, and therefore we don't allow that. He has to set her free in that situation as well. Now, what about his mother's sister? So if it's his mother's sister through their mother, it's definitely mothering relationships here. People get confused. That marriage is no good. Question becomes, what if it's his mother's sister through their father? So on the one hand, it's a relationship of his mother. On the other hand, the sisterhood that's here is not through a mother, it's through a father. So people do, to a certain extent, realize that doesn't count in the Akam world. So Yevamos Daf. Rabbi Meir says he can't marry her because people will get confused because it's on his mother's side, and the Chachamim say he could marry her, he could stay with her because people will realize that his mother and her sister, the one that he married, are not related al pi din because they're only related through their father. Now, Rabbi Meir says this as a general rule: any erva which is through the mother, you have to set aside. Any time there's a motherhood aspect to it, you got to set it aside. If it's only fatherhood, then you can stay with them. Now, next halacha, and this is what we're focusing on because this is our proof, says that he's allowed to marry his brother's wife. That, of course, was our shaila. Then it says that it's the wife of his father's brother, and all other arayas through marriage are mutter. There's no gzeira d'Rabbanan on arayas that are only created by marriage. Gzeira d'Rabbanan was only created on regular arayas without a marriage aspect connecting the two that we would like to aser. That includes in Eshes Av. That includes his father's wife. Now, if he goes ahead and he marries, so here Rashi says we're not talking about this person who was born B'Kedusha. Now we're talking about a regular ger, a convert. So if he marries a mother and her daughter, so he can stay with one, he has to send away the other one. Rashi says this is talking about that the woman and her daughter are both converts themselves. Therefore, the Rashi says there's no issue. They're both kekatan shenolad. But still, we make a gzeira, and he can't stay married to both of them. Then it says lechatchila he shouldn't marry them. The Gemara explains lechatchila he shouldn't marry them is obviously not talking about the mother and the daughter, because we just said he has to send one away. Certainly lechatchila he shouldn't marry them. It's talking about the cases we said before, that he's allowed to stay with them. Even in the ones we said that he's allowed to marry them, lechatchila he shouldn't. If he did, he could stay with them, but he should not marry them in the first place. It's only ex post facto that we say he can stay with them. Now, back to the case of the mother and the daughter. So there, if his wife dies, if the one that he's married to dies, then he's allowed to go marry her mother. That is her mother. That was her mother before they converted. Because there, we don't make Gzeira D'Rabbanan. And that, the Gemara now says, is a machlokes what the correct girsa is. Some say he's mutter to marry her, some say he's asur to marry her. So the Gemara explains later that's dependent on the machlokes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Is there a punishment of sreifa on the mother-in-law after the death of the daughter? According to the one that there is a punishment of sreifa, it's still a strict an iser after the death of the daughter, and therefore the gzeira still applies even then. According to the other opinion, we don't say it's as strict because there's no longer an iser sreifa. There's no longer a punishment of sreifa. It gets weakened once the daughter dies. It's still us, but it gets weakened. So in our case, where there's no real relationship, because they're katan shenola adami, we only say that there's a gzeira d'Rabbanan if both are alive. If the daughter has died, then we don't need to worry about that anymore. Anyway, so the Gemara says we see here clear proof. It says Be'ishu Sachiv, it says he's allowed to marry his brother's sister. It says the Gemara, again, it's talking about correction, he's allowed to marry his brother's wife, which was our Shaila. Again, the Gemara says we're talking about where the brother's wife was only a wife before they converted, and therefore does not halachically count as a wife. And the Chiddush is that you don't make Gzeira D'Rabbanan in that case, that people will mix it up to a regular Yisrael. Alright, now we get to our next Mishnah. So the Mishnah discusses where there are 5 women who gave birth, and they mixed up their children. All 5 of them had a boy, all 5 boys were confused. Now we don't know who's son. More importantly, each woman had another son, who they do know who's. And now we have 5 brothers. Each of these 5 mixed up sons has a brother, but nobody knows who his rightful brother is. Then they all marry women and they all die. Now you have 5 women falling to Yibam to 5 brothers, but no one knows who they're falling to Yibam to. So what should you do? So the Mishnah says the halacha is 4 of them have to do chalitza, and then the last one could do Yibam. That is, we have to be concerned that every single one of them is the Yavam. So 4 have to do chalitza to make sure that she's not the Yavam to those 4. Once that happened, then the one that's remaining could do Yibam. And the reason is because if she was his Yevama, so fine, he can do Yibam. If not, that means she was the Yevama of one of the other 4 brothers, and one of them, they all did chalitza already, so there's no issue. So this is what you do for all 5 women, 4 chalitzas first, and then one of them can do Yibam. Now, the way the Mishnah sets it up is that the Yibam should be done to each of the 5 women by a different brother. In each of the 5, you should have a different set of 4 doing the chalitza, and a different one should do the Yibam. So the Gemara asks, why is that true? The Gemara first points out that the chalitzas have to be done first to make sure that there's no Isser Yavam Lashuk. The Gemara says, why can't one be Miyabim, all of them? They're not sisters. What's the problem? They're each falling to even from a separate household. So the Gemara says, you're right, there's no problem, but if one brother does even to all of them, only one of them is going to be his Yavam for sure. The other 4 will just have had chalitza and not Yibam, because he's only the brother of the husbands of one of them. If you do 5 different brothers, each one does Yibam to one of them, you may get more than one. You may have a couple of them actually ending up by coincidence or hashgacha with his own Yevama, and therefore you may get maybe even all 5. It could still work out that way, and therefore you want to have that possibility. So you have each woman should have a different brother do the Yibam. Now the Gemara comes up with 2 cases where there's one of the brothers can't do a Yibam, and therefore he has to do chalitza to all 5. So you'll have to have one of them, you'll have to have the other 4 do Yibam. At least one of them will have to be Miyabim 2, or could be Miyabim 2, because this one can't do chalitza. What's that case? That's if one of them is a brother through a mother and not through a father. That means to say as follows: one of the brothers has, in this group of 5 that are confused, one of them is certainly his brother from his father, and a different one is his brother from his mother. And that's the situation. Therefore, any one that he's going to do a yibum to might be his eshes ach through a brother from his mother where there's no mitzvah of yibum, and that would be an esakaris. But they also each might be his eshes ach through his father, and therefore there's a zikas yibum. So he's got to do 5 chalitzas to make sure that he paters whichever one is his yevama, because she was married to his brother from his father. Can't do any yibums lest that one be his, because any of the 5 could be his eshes ach through the brother of that through which they share a mother. Another case like this is if one of them is a Kohen. He's a Kohen, so you can't have him marry, you can't have him do a yibum after this 4 chalitzas, because whichever one he's marrying may be a chalutza. She may be the yevama of one of the other ones who got a chalitza. He'd not be a Kohen, it's not a problem. However, since he is a Kohen, there's a problem of a Kohen marrying a chalutza, which is not allowed. If you had a situation where one of them is a brother of through the mother and one is a Kohen, so those two both can't do a yibum, you're going to have the other one pick up the slack on the yibums.